Everyone, welcome back to our video lecture on quantitative research methods in sports studies. So for this video, we'll talk about more specific details about how to conduct or construct your survey forms and also how to prepare a code book in order for you to be able to manage your quantitative data better. So basically, our topic outline is first, we are going to be reviewing the general types of surveys, and then we'll talk about the different types of survey questions and their corresponding levels of measurements, and how do we match or create a survey question in order to correspond and measure a given variable or indicator. And then also we'll talk about how to prepare a code book for quantitative surveys. So, if you remember in a previous video, we talked about the general types of survey in terms of who made those surveys. So, if the survey is made by you, the researcher, then that is researcher made. And specifically, if you made that specifically for your research, no? But if you were able to get an instrument or a survey or a scale that measures your variables that has undergone through specific psychometric tests, no, or statistical validation in order for you to be able to measure that specific variable, then that's called a standardized survey tools. So ideally, especially when you're measuring the main variables of the study, we favor more standardized survey tools. Why? Because again, these tools are validated. And why is the validation and the reliability of tools very important in quantitative research? It's because it increases the objectivity and the precision of the measurement that you are trying to conduct for your variables. Remember, if you're trying to ask a question in research and then you made use of an incorrect tool to measure the data, then you will not be able to come up with an accurate answer. Garbage in, garbage out. So, incorrect or faulty measurement tools can lead to false answers or inaccurate answers in the research. So, you can just imagine, for instance, you're trying to measure, let's say, the blood pressure of athletes and see how it is affected by certain activities that they're doing. Now, the measuring tool that you use for blood pressure is a blood pressure cuff or a sphygmomanometer or a blood pressure monitor. Now, imagine if your blood pressure monitor is defective. If your blood pressure monitor is defective, it will not be able to come up with a precise measure for the blood pressure. And therefore, whatever blood pressure that has been collected by that mechanism or by that device will not be able to give us an objective and a correct answer. And therefore, it nullifies the whole research process that has been done. So, in social research, wherein the variables that we are measuring are not biological or not physical components of the body or functions of the body, and we're looking at more social and psychological variables, we do not have devices, no? But the devices that we use in order for us to be able to measure our variables are usually done through surveys. And also, especially if our variables are psychological or social in nature, it's important that the questions or the items that are found in the survey tools are already validated and reliable. This is to make sure that, unlike the defective blood pressure cuff, we make sure that our survey tools are correctly made, they're validated, they're reliable, they're able to really measure what they are supposed to measure. No? And usually, we have already tools that are available for many of the variables that we need to measure in the field of sports studies, no, that are social in nature. So we just have to really find them and then, of course, compare which ones have the best standardization, have the best validation measures in order for us to be able to, again, measure the variables in our study correctly. Of course, this is not to say that you won't be doing researcher-made questionnaires. No, there are certain questionnaires that you need to really make your own because there are no available standardized tools for them. Like, for example, for demographic profile, you don't really need to standardize that or to validate that, because for age, the basic question is how old are you in terms of years, and that's basically a pretty much standard question. And also when you ask questions that are very society specific, like for example religious affiliation, and of course the options or the choices for one country would be different from another. Like for example, in the Philippines, we have different religions and also sects under those religions that are unique to the Philippines, that might be different from Indonesia, from Canada, or from the United States. So the options or the questions available for those specific questions are basic to society, and there's really no standardized survey tools for them. But for example, variables that are psychological, social, or behavioral in nature, like for example sports participation, physical literacy, mental well-being, emotional well-being, bullying experiences. There are already tools that are available to be able to measure this type of phenomena. So what are our considerations in order for us to be able to match our variables and dimensions with a correct type of survey question or instrument or scale? First, we have to understand the type and the nature of the variable being measured. That's why we have to learn or review about the levels or scales of measurement. We have discussed about this in our previous video. And then of course, the availability of the standardized survey tools. So usually most of the psychological, behavioral, emotional, and social variables and even those that are sports related, are already available. There have already been good scales for these types of variables. However, you might be measuring for very niche or very specific variables or specific concepts that might not have been represented in the psychometric tests yet, so you may need to do a researcher made if that is the case, but like I said, if there is one that's available, then it's good to tailor fit the variables that you are trying to measure in order for you to be able to measure the variable correctly. And then also very important is the validity and the reliability of the instrument, and that's the reason why we rely more on standardized survey tools, standardized scales, because these are already been statistically validated for internal consistency and for other dimensions of validation, like for example content, phase validity, construct validity, discriminant validity, and convergent validity. And these are some of the things that we'll be discussing in the future, in our next video lectures. So researcher made scales usually are not as valid and reliable as the standardized tools, because you don't have the capacity to be able to do your own psychometric testing for this test. So like I said, if for your main variables, it's really important that if you can find a standardized survey tool for them, then you make use of them. And then each variable and dimension must have its own component in the survey. So this is very important, that all of the dimensions and all of the variables in your study have to have its own survey component, have to have its own question, have to have their own set of questions, have their own scales, in order for you to be able to measure all the data that you need for you to be able to answer the research questions. So let us review the different levels and scales or scales of measurement. And of course, we have the four types. We have nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio. So the nominal variable or the nominal scale of measurement are named variables, and basically they are categorical. So they don't have an order. They are just really to make labels on certain groupings of variables. So example of variables that are nominal are, for example, religious affiliation, because there's really no order in these variables. Nothing is greater than the other. For example, civil status. So these are considered nominal variables. Next, we have ordinal variables that are, of course, variables that are ordered, but they are really more of categories. No, they're categorical, but they are ordered, or there is a category or a value that's larger than the other. So an example of ordinal variables are, for example, you have your so these are categorical variables. No, so an example of categorical variables that are ordered, for example, educational attainment. No, so for instance, people who are grouped within college graduate have higher educational attainment compared to high school graduates or college undergraduates. So these are grouping of variables. No, however, the groupings compared to nominal variables, these groupings are ordered. So next we have interval variables. These are variables that are named, ordered, and their order, there is a proportionate interval between the variables. It's also the same with ratio variables. No, however, ratio variables compared to interval variables are those that can accommodate absolute zero, or there's an absolute zero scale. For example of ratio scale is, for example, salary. No? So, salary can be zero. Walang trabaho, no work, so no pay, so no salary or no income. No? So, there's an absolute zero. But for interval, these are variables that have proportional interval in between the values, but they don't have an absolute zero. So, for example, there's a Likert scale. No? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, so 1 being the least happy, 5 being the most happy. There's no zero here. No, so this is considered an interval variable. But there is appropriate. It's ordered. No, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We know that 5 is higher compared to 1, but it is not ordinal or categorical because the proportion or the intervals in between 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are proportionate. Unlike, for example, when you say educational attainment, college graduate, and undergraduate, the question is what is the distance or the gap between an undergraduate and a graduate in terms of educational attainment. So it's kind of a very abstract concept that really does not have a precise or discrete gap in between them, unlike interval and ratio. So usually, those variables that come in a scale, they can be put under interval or ratio. So if that scale has no zero, then that's an interval scale. No, if the scale has a zero, then it's a ratio variable. No, and usually they come also with decimal numbers. They could be expressed in decimal numbers as well. So yun po. So that is the difference between interval ratio. So usually the statistical treatments we make use for interval and ratio are the same. So usually we just generally call them continuous variables. Okay, because they have basically the same nature of having proportionate intervals between the variables. So now we get to assign variables and indicators with specific components of a survey tool. So it's part of the whole research designing and planning. So we've set up these variables, we've set up these relationships between the variables. Each variable have their own indicators or dimensions, and each dimensions may have a set of questions or statements, or basically a scale for us to measure. So in order for us to demonstrate that practice, let's just do it with a hypothetical study. This is lifted from an actual study that I made and had been published. So let's try to look at the study entitled Student Involvement and Mental Health Status among Undergraduate Students in a Selected University in Manila. So in this study, the main variable is your student involvement. Your outcome variable is mental health status, and your antecedent variable is socio-demographic profile. And just like the problems that I asked you to come up for the previous output, there are three variables here. No, the antecedent variable is the independent variable, and the main variable is the dependent variable in testing the relationship between the two. And then for the relationship between the main variable, which is student involvement, and mental health, The independent variable is your student involvement, and the dependent variable is the outcome variable, which is the mental health status. So we have three variables: social demographic profile, student involvement, and mental health status. So again, based on the literature that we have reviewed, these were the indicators that we were able to see. And these are age, gender, year level, religion, nationality, and living arrangement. And RRL, no related literature, has seen relationships of that with student involvement. And what are the indicators that we have chosen for student involvement? We have school activities, campus-based organizations, and interactions with school social entities. So these were the indicators based on our operational definition. So we talked about their engagement in school activities, their engagement and membership in campus-based organization, and the extent to which they interact with school social entities. And then for mental health status, we have 6 major dimensions, and these are anxiety, depression, and loss of behavioral and emotional control, which together, these are signs of psychological distress. And then we have positive affect, emotional ties, and life satisfaction, which are measures of mental well-being. Okay? But basically, we are measuring 6, not the 2. Okay, so let us try to do it one by one, no? And per indicator. So again, per indicator or per dimension of the variable, there has to be a measuring tool that we assign to it. No, there should be an instrument or a component of the instrument that we assign to it, and we have to plan what would be the best way to measure it. Now, the first is we have to decide. For example, for age, how do we think would it be best to measure this? Now, what would be the level of measurement that we can measure age? Okay, so for example, you can ask age like this: how old are you in years? Correct? And then you place a text box in your online survey, and then they write 19, for example. Okay. Now, there's also another way you can measure age. Another way is bracketing the age to, for example, 18 to 20, 21 to 25 years old, and 26 to 26 years old and above. All right, and then wherever bracket they find themselves, they are going to check. Now, we asked age in 2 different ways here, correct? But this means that the way you ask age in your questionnaire will be able to transform the level of measurement. So for example, in the way you ask it in the first question, the age is a ratio variable. It's a continuous variable, right? And for the second one, since you have grouped the variables, right, you have lost now the proportionate distance in between the age ranges. And because you've lost that, it now becomes an ordinal variable. Now, the goal here is you choose the type of questioning. No, if there's a way for you to, if there is a variable like age that you are able to transform it from continuous to ordinal and vice versa, you always choose one. The basis for choice is one. You have to make sure that you have the more robust level of measurement, and usually the more robust one for us to be able to make use of better statistical analysis are continuous variables, no, ratio or interval. So we do that instead of ordinal, because here you lose some of the nature of the data. Because if someone who's 18 answers your survey, they will check this one, and if someone who's 20 will answer, they will also check the same thing. So you've lumped the two together, but they're actually having 2 different ages, right? So it's going to be more robust if you're able to differentiate the ages of each participants and not really lump them into categories altogether. Anyway, when you tally later on, if you want to do that, you can do that pa rin naman, no, post-survey, no? So this is for your ordinal. Okay, so this is for your age. No? So I would prefer that you ask age as a continuous variable rather than an ordinal variable. Okay, so now we have here for your gender, year level, and religion. Okay, so for gender, basically we can also ask this as sex at birth, so you can be more specific. No? Sex at birth. So male or female, or sometimes some would include rather not say for a little bit more SOGI aware papers. No, so they will say rather not say because they don't identify as either male or female. No. So this type of question is a checklist, and it is a nominal variable. Okay, so now for year level, of course, you have first year, second year, third year, fourth year, fifth year checklist. So again, this is not considered as a continuous variable because the arrangement, the proportion of the gap for each variable or each option is not proportionate. No. So this is more of an ordinal variable, right? So first to fifth year, no? And then we have religion. Now these are named variables, no? These are meant for groupings and categories, but these are not ordered, no? So we cannot say that Roman Catholics are better or has a higher religion than Muslim, no? So that is incorrect. So usually these are just groups and categories, and so the variables are considered as nominal. And again, you have to be very cautious of the options that you put. Like for example, here you have RC, Roman Catholic, Muslim, Iglesia ni Cristo, non-Catholic Christians. Maybe in the locality that you are distributing this questionnaire has a more or less diverse religious affiliation. So you have to put that into consideration when you provide an option. And of course, don't forget to put others, so that those who do not identify within this religious affiliations will be able to answer and give their specific religious affiliation. Okay, so if you notice, as we are updating our different indicators and assigning them with questions, I'm also updating here and assigning a specific scale of measurement that we assign based on how we ask these indicators. For example, for age, it is a continuous variable. For gender, it's a nominal variable. For year level, it's ordinal. For religion, it's nominal. So now let's move to the next two. Nationality, you can ask it this way, Filipino, and then others. No, in more culturally diverse countries, like for example in America, in the United States, in Canada, they usually ask for ethnicity and cultural heritage. Now, for example, whether they identify as white or African American or Asia Pacific Islander. But since in the Philippines, usually when we ask for nationality or ethnicity, especially in NCR areas, we just ask it this way. No? And then, of course, for others, we allow for them to specify their non-Filipino nationality. And of course, since we are only asking two questions and these two questions are not really ordered, then we consider them as nominal variables. And then we have living arrangements, and for living arrangements, the choices that I made for this specific question is whether they're living with family, living with peers, or dorm mates or classmates, and living alone. And since again these are named variables but they aren't arranged, they're in a low to high value, or they're not ordered, so this is also a nominal variable. So we already have a complete assignment for all of our indicators under social demographic profile. So in this study, our second variable is student involvement. Now, we can always get a standardized questionnaire in order for us to measure student involvement. But specifically a variable that's named student involvement, there's not really a standardized questionnaire that's available. You can choose to change the nature of the variable, like make this student engagement, no, and then there are already variables. But only for purposes of practice, what if we need to make a variable that's not demographic, and we're going to create we're going to create a measure for a variable like this that is measured as a scale? How do we do that, no? And what are our options for doing so? So these were activities that were usually done on a regular basis in the university where this research was conducted. Now, what type of measurement is this? Is this nominal, ordinal, interval, or ratio? Now, if the idea is to measure each indicator or each statement, and then you're going to say whether this is a yes or a no, then that is a nominal variable. But in this actual study, it was measured this way. It was measured as counting how many yeses. So, for example, the highest possible score is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7, and of course, the lowest possible is 0. So, in terms of the number of activities that is being engaged or involved in by the student who is answering. So if it is going to be the sum, then this is now a continuous variable, or specifically an interval variable. So the next dimension is campus-based organizations. And in this study, what we did here is we listed down all of the common organizations that are found in school, like the varsity, the college publication, theater group, etc., etc. And then, just like the earlier scale or the earlier questionnaire, they were asked to answer whether they attended this organization or they were members of these organizations or not. So they were asking yes, no, yes, yes, no, based on whether or not this is true for them or not. Alright, so it's also the same, no? If the measure is going to be whether or not in this specific it's yes or specific is no, then it's also going to be nominal. But if the treatment for this scale is to count how many yeses, no, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so in this case, how many yeses? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there are 6 yeses here. So the score is 6 out of 10. So that is going to be also an interval. I'm sorry, this is going to be a ratio. My mistake, because there is a 0 value. Also for the school activities earlier, supposed to be ratio because it is possible to have a 0 score. So we already corrected it here, no? So they're both ratio scales. Okay, so the third subdimension of student engagement is interaction with social entities. So basically, to what extent do the students have social interactions with the different school social entities, no? And we listed here the school social entities. So remember, when you set your questionnaire, no, instrument, it's always very important to have correct instructions, complete instructions. No, for example, maybe there's some missing here. Like for example, in the last 30 days, rate the frequency of your interaction or communication with the following social entities in school, and then they will encircle their answers. No, so there should be a very clear and laymanized instruction in the questionnaire or the instrument or the survey that you are going to give to the students or to the participants, no? So that again, they will be able to easily understand and they will be able to give you a more honest and correct and precise answer. So this is an example of what we call a Likert scale. So Likert scale was introduced by Rensis Likert. Sorry, it's Likert. And usually there's a 5-point, a 4-point, and a 3-point or a 7-point Likert scales based on certain sentiments that we attach to a certain indicator, statement, no? Like for example, in this case, we're talking about social interactions, and these are formatively described as interaction. And who are the social entities in school? Peers, faculty members, dean, library staff, guidance counselors, secretaries, and auxiliary staff. And then the student will think about the last 30 days and whether or not the extent to which they subjectively rate themselves in terms of the frequency of how they interact with these people. So they will be able to answer. So, and then of course we remember that in Likert scales, you have to assign a verbal interpretation for the number. So this could be strongly agree, neutral, disagree, strongly disagree. It could be always, often, sometimes, rarely, or very characteristic of me, or not characteristic of me. So these are what you always have to assign that, no? So this is an example of a Likert scale. And finally, for our last variable of mental health, so this one, we made use of a standardized questionnaire. And in the standardized questionnaire, they have already provided the dimensions of mental health status, and it's found here: anxiety, depression, loss of behavioral and emotional control, general positive affect and emotional ties, and life satisfaction. They also have provided how to score the each dimensions, no? And this is an interval scale, right? Because there's no 0, because the lowest is always number 1. And they have different questions and ways they ask questions. And basically what you do here is you sum. So each scale that you get, this is standardized by the RAND Corporation. No, so there are reliability tests, statistical tests that were done here. So this is also very important that, I know originally that in your operationalization of the variables, you were able to find specific indicators or suggest specific indicators. But remember that in that operationalization, it may still change or be changed when you find a standardized questionnaire and they are offering a different type of indicator or dimension. Okay, so if you do find you have to update the table of your survey, question, of your survey tool, no, and your variables, no, and also update your operational definition to match what the instrument is really asking in order for you to measure the variable correctly. Okay, so this is MHI the mental health inventory with 38 items and measures this scale, no? So this was used in this study because it is highly reliable, it is highly valid, it really measures mental health correctly. Because imagine if you're just going to, on your own as college students with no psychology degree or no expertise in psychology, going to make a question that looks into mental well-being, I don't think that you will be credible enough to write that on your own, right? So this needs a little bit more expertise, and we can lend that expertise from those who are really researching on these concepts for a very long time, creating actual questionnaires that really measures this the most correct way. This has been tested in various populations in various countries. So this is very dependable, and therefore we make use of it for the measurement of the mental health status of our population. And now let's talk about how to create code books. So a code book is something that provides information on the structure, contents, and layout of a data file that is usually the output of the congregated or collated data that you have collected from your survey. The good thing about doing online surveys is that you already have the data file provided to you almost immediately by Google Forms, for instance. So there's really no problem in terms of, making them. But if you're doing this in a field research, the database has to be done correctly. The database is different from the codebook. The codebook is basically how do you input data in your database. No, it's the how. The database is the actual place where you find the numerals coming from the data that you are inheriting from the survey form. So users are strongly recommended to review the codebook of a study before downloading the data file of the Google Forms, no? Or for example, if you are doing secondary research, it's important that you know what is the meaning of the 1, 2, 3, 4, especially for categorical, nominal, and ordinal data. You have to know what those means. So these are examples of codebooks that I've downloaded in the internet. So they have the basic they have the basic inputs or the basic tables or entries, no? For example, the question number in the survey form, the variable name that corresponds to specific question number, the description of the variable or the label of the variable, and how it is being coded. And so this is also the same for this code book, no? They indicate the value of the value or the label of the variable, the answers that are available for each variable, and the number that you are going to assign per answer. So you're also going to do that for your specific survey, no? And from one researcher to the next, no, their requirements for the code book would be different. So I will give you a recommended table that will be the basis of the code book of the survey data that you will be getting from your participants or respondents. So again, we always would like to relate all of the codes to the main variable of the study, because you don't want to get lost in the coding that you forget what variable is this code a part of. So we always have to be we always have to put that there. So that's why I put here the main variable, and then the specific dimension that specific variable or that specific question is asking, no? And then the scale of measurement that we made earlier, no, if you remember, and then what question number in the Google form or in the online survey is that question, and then what is the variable label that you will put in the database. Remember, in the database, you don't have, for example, this is, let's say, study regularly. You don't put that as the whole label. It has to be coded, no? And there should be no space. So for example, since age is just a short word, so we just say age, no? Gender, and then for so there, and then the actual question being put, no, being asked in the questionnaire, and then the coding instruction, no? For example, write as is. So if they write 25, then they just write 25, and then if they have no question, then you write 9. The problem here is that or 99, sorry, because this is if you expect 2 digits, then it has to be 2 nines, no? So so the good thing about online service is that there is a lesser there is a lesser chance that you will have an empty answer, because you can require them to answer certain questions. So please do that so that you don't have missing so that the participants don't forget to answer. So another example, let's try gender. What scale of measurement, what question number it is, and then what is the name of the column for the variable label in your database, and then the actual question that you ask, and then numbers. So usually we have male 1, female 2, and then if you have rather not say, then that's 0. So if you don't have rather not say, then maybe you can just have 1 or 2. No, and then we have, for example, estimated monthly income. Since we're going to ask this as income brackets, then they could be ordinal, and then you write which if it's question number 3, and then the variable label, since we cannot use the whole estimated monthly income, then that would be we can just use the word income. And then the question is, what is your estimated monthly income? And then you will assign a number for each bracket. So let me just pull up a sample bracket. So for example, you are going to base the bracket in the NEDA's income brackets that was based on a 2018 study. Then for example, for poor, with this, so this is the income bracket that you will ask, no? So what would be your code? So for the poorer ones, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then for missing, you have 9. So this is another example of how you can do your coding for ordinal variables. And then another example, for example, you're doing a research whose main variable is online student engagement. Okay, so for example, your first dimension is skills. Now, online student engagement has 4 dimensions of skills, cognition, emotion, and behavior. So for in this case, you're doing skills, and for skills, you used a skill. So unlike age, wherein you can only ask it for one question, no, you can actually some variables, especially the main variables, have more than one question in order to measure that variable. So these are either the reflective or formative variables, no? So in this case, so these questions that asks whether a student studies regularly, stay up on reading, look over class notes, be organized. So these are all questions that relate to skills, and it is the total score that they get from this, the total or the average score that they get from all of these questions that describes the dimension of the skills. Now these are interval scales. Why? Because it starts with the 1, so there's no absolute 0, and then of course they have question numbers in your Google form, in your online form. And then for the variable label, you can just strategize and make abbreviations. So for instance, no, I use OSE because online student engagement, and then S for skills, and then the question number. So for example, there are 6 questions for skills, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I write the actual questions, and since they share the same coding instruction, wherein if they answer not at all characteristic of me, that's 1, not really characteristic, 2, moderately, 3, characteristic of me, 4, very characteristic of me, 5. No, and then that is what you will write in the column under the specific variable, the specific indicator or statement column. Okay, and then there is the process of coding we call the reverse coding. So reverse coding is where the actual question is actually asking something that is the negative, okay, or the reverse of what is really being asked by the variable. So for example, we're asking about online student engagement. So usually when the score is higher, then it means that that engagement is good. But there are certain standardized questionnaires or unstandardized questionnaires that ask ironic questions, like negatively framed questions, so that just to measure whether or not in the other end of the spectrum are they really high or low. So they just check most of that, no, and that will decrease any form of subjectivity, no. So for example, the actual question for under emotions, no, for OSE is I attach positive feeling towards learning. So if I answer this high, it means that I have higher online student engagement. But there's another question called I am very moody when it comes to learning. So if I am moody and I say yes, this is me, then it means my online student engagement is bad. So this one, it's positively framed. So a higher score means better student engagement, and I am moody, a higher score means lower student engagement. So that it will not have a problem in terms of the way you will compute it. You can automatically, when you put it in your database, it has to already be negatively coded. So for example, for positively framed questions, if they say not at all characteristic, the score is low. If it's very characteristic, the score is high. But for those that are negatively framed like this, if they say that no, this is not me, then it means that my emotions are okay, so the score is higher. And when they say no, this is me, I am really moody, then I have a low score. So that's called reverse coding, no? So you have to that's why you have to have a code book, because you already have to identify these things early on so that it will not create a mistake when you already apply your statistical analysis. There are also code books that are already available or can be created through the actual softwares. No, for the statistical softwares, they already offer that you can already have separate windows for you to be able to create these code books. I will not be able to teach you in this specific video, but I will be recommending a video for Jamovi, how you do variable descriptions and how you prepare a sort of code book for your database that you have downloaded, or for the code book the database that you are just about to create. And I will give you that so that you can have an idea or skill on how to do that. So In this video, we were able to review how to do surveys, and we demonstrated the creation of the elements and components of the survey and vis-a-vis the levels and scales of measurement per variable, per dimension, per indicator. And we also talked about how to create a code book when you already have your variables and your instruments.